Donald Trump makes a triumphant return to the Capitol for the first time since he left office. Will any Republicans speak truth to power? Bright lights.
I wish you guys would play by the rules a little bit.
President Biden heads overseas for the second time in 2 weeks. Is America still the leader of the free world? And in harm's way, Robert Sherman heads out with the Eisenhower carrier battle group into the Red Sea. Will Iran ever stop shooting at our sailors? Start with live pictures on a beautiful Thursday evening in Washington, D.C., where Donald Trump made his highly anticipated return, and it was, to the nation's capital. First time he set foot inside the building since he left office. And with that, we welcome you to the fairest show on television. First tonight, the book written by John Kennedy, Profiles in Courage, was about what happened inside the United States Capitol. And we did not see any profiles in courage from Republicans today. Republicans lined up to fawn over the former president. And in meeting after meeting, they listened to him, they complimented him, and then they came out to talk to the press and send a unified message to the American people.
President Trump brought an extraordinary amount of energy and excitement and enthusiasm this morning.
We are 100% unified behind his candidacy and are ready to get to work on behalf of the American people.
A lot of unifying messages from President Trump, but also optimistic messages.
Unity, lots of unity, more unity, tons of unity. I'm not an elections expert, but unity does not win elections. It's nice, it's helpful. Means that there's not going to be stories written about divisions inside the Republican Party. But Republicans weren't unified in 2016 at all, and Trump won. They were unified in 2020, and Trump lost. So unity really isn't that big of a deal. What this shows is that Donald Trump is the king. So no matter what he says, no matter how absurd it is, no matter how untrue it is, no matter how divisive it is, no matter how unhelpful it is to Republicans, Republicans will never tell him to stop saying stupid things. They cannot do it publicly, and they will not do it privately. Like today when he reportedly called Milwaukee a terrible city. Horrible city, quote. That's a problem. Milwaukee is in Wisconsin, a swing state and host of the Republican convention. So Trump is now playing cleanup. In an interview with Fox, Trump said he was specifically referring to crime in Milwaukee. And when Donald Trump says something, it's normally because people have said things to him. Someone told him that things in Milwaukee were horrible, so he said it's a horrible city. To be fair, that's what happens. In his interview, Mr. Trump also made some news when he talked about a potential running mate.
Was your pick for VP in that room with you?
Probably, yeah. Probably. I don't want to go, but probably. I think we'll probably announce it during the convention.
We start tonight with Byron Donalds, Republican from Florida, who is under consideration to be Donald Trump's running mate, although I promise not to ask you about that. It'll be your first interview where the question doesn't come up. Congressman, it's nice to see you. Thank you. One word we kept hearing from President Trump today over and over was unified. The Republicans are unified. Are you unified around winning or unified around Donald Trump?
Well, we're unified around winning. Donald Trump is our nominee. He's the leader of our party. So, of course, we're united unanimously behind him to get him across the line. But today on Capitol Hill, President Trump talked about the work he was committing to do for members of the Senate, members of the House, our colleagues who might have tough re-elections, and even some of our candidates who are out there trying to flip seats currently held by Democrats up here on Capitol Hill. So it's an all-hands-on-deck approach. The president laid that out in his remarks today with members of the House, also with members of the Senate when he met with them.
All right, fair enough. You know, one thing we hear from a lot of down-ballot Republicans, that is people who are running for House seats, people who are running for Senate seats, so often, especially in tight races, they get saddled with answering for everything Donald Trump said. Was there any discussion from the Republican caucus to Donald Trump of saying, look, we get why you do the rallies, but if you could just stop saying stupid stuff between now and the election, it might make winning on the issues of inflation and immigration and foreign policy a lot easier?
Well, first of all, that never came up. Nobody even insinuated anything close to that. I think what you got to understand when you get into presidential politics is that how he goes is we're going to go with him. His coattails are going to be enormous in this election. And I think people at this point in America are sick and tired of all of the games that get played in media and, frankly, by the Democrats where they want to pick and choose words. What they're much more interested in is what is your agenda and what that means for them in their own lives. And in this presidential election, Americans are going to have a very clear choice between the 45th president and the 46th president. And it's without question that the lives of the American people were significantly better under the 45th president of the United States, Donald Trump. That's why he's going to be 47.
All right, so I'm not going to argue the polling with you, but I agree with you that the majority of Americans do agree that things were better under Donald Trump, at least economically. But you said that the word games don't matter. When President Trump said that he was going to look at possibly banning contraception, that means that every Republican Senate candidate and every Republican House candidate is going to have to answer for those things. Words do matter, especially when you want to be the leader of the free world. And I'm wondering why, when it would be so easy, why no Republican would stand up and say, Mr. President, if you just talk about the things that you, Byron Donalds, just spoke about, rather than other stuff, it'd be a lot easier for all of us.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think with what the comment you just said, I don't even recall him ever saying that. It might have said in a line of thinking about a myriad of subjects. If you've talked to Donald Trump, he talked about it even today. When it comes to abortion, when it comes to contraception, those are things that, frankly, are going to be left in the hands of states. You even have the Supreme Court that just came out today essentially saying that the abortion pill, mifepristone, they unanimously rejected the challenge to that. So when you bring up these issues around something which is very personal, like contraception, the president has not weighed in definitively saying, that we're going to move for some sort of ban. That is not the case. He has never said something like that.
To be fair, Congressman, he said in an interview, he said in an interview that he was going to look at it, and then about an hour later he came out and said, never mind. Now, you could say he misspoke, which I think he would agree that he did, but the fact of the matter is that's what happens. It's a problem for Republicans. The polling leads that and shows that. Biden head-to-head, Trump 46, Biden 45. Okay? Donald Trump right now is up 1 point in the decision desk average of polls. He's up in all the swing states. But he's up on the issues a lot more. Who's going to handle the economy better? Trump by 10 points. Immigration, Trump by 14 points. I was not a math major. That's why I went into journalism. Joe Biden is ahead on abortion. No surprise there. Mental and physical fitness needed to be president. Donald Trump is up by 20 points. So on all the issues, other than abortion, Donald Trump is up double digits, sometimes 20 points. It's unheard of. Yet he and Joe Biden are neck and neck. How do you explain that delta if it is not the American people, for lack of a better way to shorthand this, not liking mean tweets?
Well, a couple things. First, Leland, you just said in your commentary that he came out and said he would look at it, and it came out an hour later and said, no, we're not going to do it. America is tired of politicians who are automatons, who say everything perfectly scripted that the consultants bring them, because the history has demonstrated that these robotic politicians are not looking out for the interests of the American people. They're listening to consultants, they're listening to pollsters, and frankly, they're listening to people who do not have the interests of the American people first. That's number one. Number two, to the broader section, when you look at overall polling in terms of Republican, Democrat, yes, we're a divided nation when it comes to Republicans and Democrats. We definitely know that. I think a lot of that has to play with the demonization by the Democrats and frankly by the media onto Donald Trump the last 8 years. But I believe in this election, people are going to look at the results for their pocketbook at home, the results of policy in America, and it's without a doubt that Donald Trump is the choice. With respect to mean tweets, I would implore the American people, what matters more to you? How you feel about something that might have been said 7 years ago, or the reality of how disastrous Joe Biden's presidency is today? And I think that is the fundamental choice for this election. That's why Donald Trump's going to be president again.
All right, so we can we could agree, I think, and it's a point you've made, that the media at all, not all, is on the side of Joe Biden and would love nothing more than for Joe Biden to win and is working towards that fact. You've also made the point, and I think you're correct, that if this is a referendum on Joe Biden and on the issue you just laid out, were you better off under Trump or are you better off under Biden? Obviously, Donald Trump is going to win. Even the White House privately, or at least Biden supporters privately, will say that. So with those two things in mind, wouldn't it make sense to not give the media, who is in the bag for Joe Biden, all of these opportunities to, as you would say, misconstrue, screw, and spin words?
Well, look, I will tell you firsthand, the media wastes no time trying to find any reason to twist anything. We cannot operate a campaign like that. You can't run for any office being concerned about what the media is going to say, because quite frankly, their track record is atrocious. I mean, it's abysmal if we're going to be... Leland, you're doing a great job, but the rest of the media is god-awful. So you can't run a campaign like that. You got to talk directly to people. You got to talk exactly about what the issues are, and hopefully that resonates. And I mean, and look at what Donald Trump is doing. UFC fights, going into regular stores, talking with the American people directly. He was just on TikTok with Logan Paul, the United States champion himself. He's taking his messages to everybody, not just doing segments on cable news. And that's very, very important when you're trying to run for a presidency in 2024.
I'll add, because you didn't. He's going a lot of places that Joe Biden isn't willing to go, like on the campaign trail, which we understand. And any of his surrogates are welcome. Joe Biden surrogates, they often decline, but they are more than welcome as well. Congressman Donalds, thank you as always. We appreciate it. Look forward to having you back, hopefully on set sometime.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Fellow world leaders had to pull Joe Biden back when he wandered off during a photo op. Why America isn't leading the world anymore when we come back. And Tom Brady, the GOAT, with some life advice. Why Brady can get away with saying things nobody else can.
To be successful at anything, the truth is you don't have to be special. You just have to be what most people aren't. Consistent, determined, and willing to work for it.
This video maybe best encapsulates President Biden's problem overseas. As you can see, all of the G7 leaders are talking, and then he appears to wander off. Now, to be fair, there's another parachutist over there you see him giving the thumbs up to, only for the Prime Minister of Italy to bring him back, and there he is for the photo op. What I'm about to say, though, isn't partisan. Kennedy, Reagan, Bush, both of them, Clinton, Obama, they attended NATO conferences, G7 meetings, D-Day memorials, summits, as leaders of the free world. And you could see, especially in those what they call the family photo, the group picture that always gets staged at these events, you could see the deference and respect of other leaders. A devastating piece in the New York Times from Tuesday says America isn't leading the world. That's the New York Times. The quote, "Never in the decades since the Cold War has the United States looked less like a leader of the world and more like the head of a faction reduced to defending its preferred side against increasingly aligned adversaries, as much of the world looks on and wonders why the Americans think they're in charge." And to be fair, maybe President Biden doesn't think he's in charge. At least Iran doesn't think he's in charge. Robert Sherman is in the Middle East tonight, where Iran is still shooting at American Navy ships. But we start with former UN Ambassador John Bolton. Ambassador, good to see you. Thank you, sir. President Biden spent 40 years in the Senate where everything was about partnerships, not about leadership. And I'm wondering if that's not sort of the way America is, and President Biden is leading right now. Everything's about partnership, and it's not about being the leader of the free world.
Well, I think that is a part of his approach, very definitely, and it's been summarized as saying it's that the coalition is more important than achieving the objectives of the coalition, and certainly that's been Biden's approach in Ukraine. He's happy to say NATO is unified, sort of ignoring that Ukraine's being ground into the dust after more than 2 years at war, and we're not making progress toward the stated objective of all NATO members, which is the restoration of full Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. He's just happy NATO's together, and that's obviously not enough.
Obviously, it matters when you look at this group of leaders here. My buddy Mike Allen pointed out that the Italian prime minister he's hosting is the only one who has an approval rating in their own home country above 40%. She's from the right wing of Europe. That point aside at least a little bit, because it may not matter what the prime minister of the UK or Macron of France thinks, since they're not perhaps long for this job. But our adversaries are watching the press conference with Zelensky. They're watching the meeting. What do they look and see in President Biden as a leader?
Well, I don't think they see a strong and assertive leader, and they see the Russians invading Ukraine and not doing well because of the poor performance of Russia's own armed forces, but not being effectively rebutted by the West, not being sanctioned effectively, not driving back Russian territory except from the early days of the war. They see Iran launching its Ring of Fire strategy against Israel and suffering essentially no damage in its own territory. China has to be wondering what opportunity it should take next, whether against Taiwan or in the South China Sea. And I think it's that weakness, that indecision that our adversaries are sizing up. Many examples of it, but I'm just worried that now in a pre-election period in a very divided country, China or terrorists based in Afghanistan post the American withdrawal may try to take advantage of our overwhelmed bandwidth.
Well, and you had terrorists who came across the southern border, ISIS members, 8 of them, who were then released in to the United States. You brought up the issue of Ukraine, and it's certainly sort of taken a step back. Every time there's a fight over funding, it becomes the preeminent issue for discussion. And obviously, it's something President Biden has sort of staked his presidency on, at least from a foreign policy standpoint. This is a little bit of Donald Trump talking about the war in Ukraine. Take a listen.
I think I can end it very quickly. I get along very well with Putin, and I get along with Zelensky. And I would get him in a room, and I would get it ended. I tell the other, you're not going to get any money. I would get a settlement in 24 hours. Now, it should have never happened. Let me just put it a nicer way. If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours. I will get the problem solved, and I will get it solved in rapid order, and it will take me no longer than one day. I know exactly what to say to each of them.
Okay, one day aside, is there not something to be said for the position of a lot of Republicans, and perhaps led by Donald Trump, that the restoration of full territorial integrity of Ukraine leads to a never-ending war of attrition, and that at least one side, which are Republicans, are acknowledging that you're going to have some kind of negotiated end to this, and the never-ending, as you point, unity policy of President Biden is folly?
Well, both Biden and Trump are wrong in their approach to the war. Biden has mishandled it very badly over a period of 2 years. We have been consistently deterred by the Russians. We failed to deter them from invading. But Biden has parceled out assistance to Ukraine on a totally non-strategic basis for fear of a wider war, which I don't think Putin had the capacity to wage in any event. But the idea that, and I'll leave the 24-hour thing out as well from Trump's remark, although it's an indication of just how childish his whole approach is. But even leaving that out, the idea is just going to get him in a room and solve the problem, and he knows what to do. He may think he does, but that's not the way it works, unless he intends basically to shove one of them under the bus. And I think it's pretty clear from other things he said that the one he's going to shove under the bus is Zelensky and by indirection, Ukraine. So I think Ukraine has a lot to worry about if Trump's elected.
Yeah, I think that is an assessment which is difficult to disagree with. Mr. Ambassador, thank you as always. We appreciate the time, sir.
Glad to do it.
Now, allies not respecting us, which is sort of what Ambassador Bolton said is one thing. Enemies not fearing us plays out every day in the Red Sea, especially the Iranians. You haven't heard about this lately because the media has totally ignored this story for the past couple of months. But Iranian-backed rebels are shooting every day at the U.S. Navy. It's happening over and over and over again. The strikes the Biden administration ordered didn't work. And the Iranians are doing it despite all the promises over and over and over again by President Biden. We sent Robert Sherman out on the USS Eisenhower carrier battle group to get a firsthand look at what the receiving end of Iranian aggression looks like. Robert is just off the ship and joins us from Bahrain. Hi, Robert.
Hey there, Leland. And the message from the United States Navy is clear. The whole world is underestimating these Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. They say that they are capable, they are well armed, and what is currently happening in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden is unprecedented and unlike anything they've seen before.
Captain, from Yemen where? Okay. Right to the same ship. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Completely innocent ship that was just hit by the Houthis today. This is every day.
How legitimate are their capabilities?
Yeah, I think people undersell the Houthis' capability. This anti-ship ballistic missile is a game changer.
They're a legitimate terrorist organization, and they conduct attacks almost daily out here.
8 months ago, the average American would have had a difficult time telling you exactly who the Houthis in Yemen are. Since late last year, the Houthis have captured a ship, they have sunk a ship, they've also killed 3 sailors here in this region.
They've got a lot of advanced weaponry that they've purchased or been delivered from their friends in Iran, and they have no problem using it.
I think our objective is to save lives, to put it very simply.
No aircraft carrier has been busier in the last 5 years than the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. Over 550 days of deployment within that span. This ship was deployed once again in October. It first arrived in the Red Sea in November.
This word keeps coming up. This is unprecedented. The Houthis have decided to attack maritime shipping.
Over 10% of trade goes through the Red Sea itself, about 30% of the globe's container traffic.
They've also decided to attack U.S. warships as well.
We're the first ship targeted by an anti-ship ballistic missile. We're the first ship to shoot down an anti-ship ballistic missile in combat in history.
So we just saw what's behind this door, which is the Combat Information Center. From the second that one of those missiles is fired at this ship, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. How to intercept, where to intercept, what kind of tools to be used. All of those decisions, in some cases, have to be made in a matter of seconds.
We've got some exquisite capabilities, both defensive and self-defense.
Naval aviators had played such a key role in the United States' efforts against the Houthis in Yemen, being able to go on offense.
When you're sitting in that cockpit and you know that there are very legitimate adversaries that are on the ground, what goes through your mind?
I try to pretty much just think about the mission itself. Launching into the pitch black night at like 2 a.m., going in there knowing that we were the tip of the spear in the case.
You have nearly 5,000 souls aboard here. What keeps you up at night?
I'll tell you this. I keep the Houthis up at night. I sleep soundly.
The United States Navy has a tall order in front of them. One officer described it as trying to defend every inch of water from Maine down to Florida. And the attacks aren't stopping. Just today, a merchant vessel was struck twice in the Gulf of Aden. The Houthis claim this is all about what's going on in Gaza right now. The ship they hit today, no connection to Israel, no connection to the United States. Leland.
Yeah, the point that the Houthis are not giving up means the Iranians are telling them not to, which speaks volumes to the place we are in the world today. Robert, great reporting. We'll keep hearing from you tomorrow on NewsNation, obviously, and Robert's pieces will stay with us through the weekend and then again on Monday. Robert, thanks. Biden on the world stage, well, he was there and he made a mockery of the White House press corps. President Biden scolded the press. He said they're not playing by the rules. George Will on if the press has finally had enough and what the rules are. President Biden is at the G7 conference in Italy. He met with the Ukrainian president. Not much really happens at G7 conferences. He promised more aid to Ukraine. President Zelensky thanked him. There you go. And then President Biden did something he hasn't done in recent memory. He took questions from the press. Normally presidents do that a few times a week. This president never does. And evidently, Bloomberg's White House reporter, Josh Wingrove, had the gall, the temerity to ask him a question that was not on the approved list. And today, a tired President Biden said the quiet part out loud to the White House press corps.
Message to allies, including those here at the G7, about what more, if anything, the U.S. can do to drive towards a peace agreement. Thank you.
I wish you guys would play by the rules a little bit. I'm here to talk about a critical situation in Ukraine. You asked me another subject. I'll be happy to answer it in detail later.
Of course, it's been months since President Biden did a solo news conference or answered any questions in detail, but that's not really the point. We predicted this would happen. The White House press corps is now fed up, and that is huge news. George Will is here, NewsNation senior political contributor, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist. George, you've been doing this an awful lot longer than I have, and you're smarter too. Am I making too big of a deal out of this?
No, when a Democrat winds up complaining about the press, he's picking up a theme that really entered our politics in a big way in Nixon's first term when his vice president, Spiro Agnew, went around the country complaining about the nattering nabobs of negativism and other overuses of alliteration to complain about the press. And Republicans, it seemed to me, conservatives, have a pretty strong argument against the coverage they get. When a Democrat says the press is being unfair to him, and when he says it's unfair because they're not playing by the rules.
What rules?
Yes, who wrote the rules?
Who wrote the rules? Who agreed to play by the rules? The White House Correspondents Association. The White House Correspondents Association believes in the public interest to make it clear that as a presidential press conference at home or abroad, there are no preconditions regarding questions, which is interesting because this White House has a track record of predicting what the questions were. These were the cue cards that were caught by an eagle-eyed photographer. This is now going back a year and a half. Of a President Biden press conference, and it had the reporter's picture, who he was supposed to call for, and then the talking points for the answer. So one would imagine he pretty much knew what the questions were, and you would think over the past year or so he has gotten, or his handlers have gotten far more restrictive with the press. They certainly have in terms of access. Why now is the White House press corps, that certainly prefers Joe Biden over Donald Trump from an intellectual standpoint, and a personal standpoint, why would they be turning on him now?
If you're confined to the White House campus and one person on the campus is what you're there for, and you never see him, and he doesn't have informal interactions with you, doesn't even joke with them the way Reagan and some other people do, you go stir crazy. You begin to feel as though you're being fed like pablum from the president, that you're a child getting pureed peaches by a spoon, and they don't like it. They're bored.
Well, they're bored, but I also think it's interesting because the White House trades on access, and it's not just access to the president, right? It's access to members of the administration, the chief of staff, cabinet members, on and on and on. And if you break the rules, then you get punished. That's the way the White House enforces its discipline. It's interesting that the White House press corps is now fighting back at the risk of getting punished. Obviously, we're going to ask this Bloomberg reporter when he gets back from the trip if he still has his White House press credentials, if he's able to join us and discuss. But what's the next step of this? Is the next step of this the White House starting to get stories out there about how hard it is to ask Biden a question, how many days it's been since a press conference?
We may have passed a little inflection point when the Wall Street Journal published, I guess last week, that long, heavily reported story based on 45 conversations with different people about the multiplying evidence of the declining capacities of the president. That might have broken the dam. For the White House press corps, if they don't have access, you can't threaten to punish them by denying their access.
Yeah, the flip side also is they have to prove their relevancy, right? If they're just taking taking whatever is spoon-fed to them. They can do that from somewhere other than on a beautiful trip to the G7 in Italy.
Exactly.
Where does this go from here? Because I think reasonable people can agree that there is a fear, hatred, and anger, a loathsome, whatever you want to call it, among the Washington press elite against Donald Trump. And while Joe Biden is imperfect to them, he is at least not Donald Trump. Does their own credibility at this point rise above their like for Biden, dislike for Trump?
Leland, we're in uncharted territory. We've had presidents before who were syntactically challenged. Dwight Eisenhower famously could get lost in the sentence. But he was also a very shrewd man who once said to his press secretary, be careful about what you say about Formosa, now Taiwan. And Ike said, don't worry, I'll confuse him. He knew how to deflect them. That's different than what you have now. This is a president whose own people don't trust him to improvise and articulate his own positions on the fly.
That for the President of the United States is saying something in terms of...
Well, you've had Reagan, you'd had Jack Kennedy, who was a charmer and banter and self...
George W. Bush, who had nicknames for everybody, even those that didn't like him. Yeah, no, very different. Mr. Will, good to see you, sir. Thank you. New York City, 2024. In a subway car where masked men demanded Jews get off. Here's a question for you. As evil as what they did is, why aren't American Jews fighting back harder? Violent crime down in America are at best highly misleading. That didn't stop CNN from using them to, quote, fact check Donald Trump after his speech today on Capitol Hill.
However, sort of inconvenient statistics for the former president, violent crime dropping by more than 15% in the U.S. during the first 3 months of 2024. This is according to statistics released on Monday by the FBI.
And there's a little smile from the CNN anchor. My job's to ask questions, so here it goes. If you are fact-checking with objectively misleading statistics, does that make you the same as Donald Trump, who just makes up most of his statistics? We wrote about this first in War Notes. You can reply. War Notes is our free email newsletter that comes out every day at 4 p.m. with our thoughts on the most important stories of the day, including the FBI statistics. Go to warnotes.com to subscribe for free. We'll see you on social media as well, at Leland Vittert. In War Notes today, we highlighted a speech by the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady.
To be successful at anything, the truth is you don't have to be special. You just have to be what most people aren't. Consistent, determined, and willing to work for it. No shortcuts.
Pretty simple, right? Brady spoke at the Patriots Hall of Fame induction ceremony. More on the life lessons from Tom Brady and why there is such a push to reward mediocrity in America. He talked about that, both in War Notes and on the show tomorrow. Neldia writes to War Notes, we enjoy your show every day and really congratulate you for the piece you did on Roger Federer, the best to you. Well, thank you. Federer's message was a lot like Tom Brady's. There is no substitute for hard work. Lulu wrote to War Notes on Friday, Leland, it was obvious that you are not an early bird when I watched you anchor the morning show on a day I had to get up early myself, and I totally get it and got a chuckle out of it. Here's to the night owls. Thank you for your loyalty. I'm glad. It was only a week of the morning show, so is Dutch and Rachel. Although the morning show feeds you all sorts of stuff I never knew. I think we need more donuts, perhaps. We'll work on that for the evening show. Shelley writes, Leland, you have to stop interrupting your guests. You are not the fairest news. Well, Shelley, we interrupt everybody when they start with talking points. That's what makes us fair. We interrupt both sides when they start wasting the viewer's time. We are your advocate. Bo writes to War Notes, I would be careful calling war protesters pro-Hamas. I get what makes your sentiment correct, but I don't believe most of these kids actually support a terrorist organization, government, rather than hate war as a generation after generation have done since the 60s. The constant pro-Hamas statements by you is unfair and done to get followers, which makes it sad to me. So I'm glad you brought this up, Bo. It's done to be accurate. When people chant from Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, They mean from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. That's the destruction of the state of Israel. That is Hamas's sole purpose. You can see one of their supporters on the cover of the New York Post. Now some marchers openly wear Hamas flags and garb. People showed up to a Ku Klux Klan rally. We would say they are all racists. The same thing applies here. You show up to support Hamas demonstrators, you support Hamas. Speaking of the Ku Klux Klan, if men in white robes demanded black passengers get off an Atlanta bus, the national media would rightly lose their minds. So why isn't the same thing happening when pro-Hamas types order Jews off subway cars?
Raise your hands if you're a Zionist! Raise your hands if you're a Zionist! This is your chance to get out! This is your chance to get out!
In a sad repeat of history, there's a lot of American Jews who are refusing to stand up and fight back against the very scary rise of anti-Semitism. And this isn't about not letting Jews into clubs. What's happening in America is exactly the same stuff that happened in Nazi Germany during the rise of Hitler. Like the mob of people who got on a New York City train and told all the Jews to get out.
Repeat after me! Repeat after me! Raise your hands if you're a Zionist! 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 This is your chance to get out! This is your chance to get out! Okay, no Zionists, we're good.
That's in New York City. This is the house of the director of the Brooklyn Museum. She's Jewish. You see red inverted triangles painted on the windows and doors. Those are symbols used by Hamas to signal Israeli targets. They're also spray painted on New York City subway cars. These are the hordes of people outside a memorial for victims of October 7th with a sign that says, "Long live October 7th." And to be sure, the response by the media and many elected officials to this is pathetic. American Jews are complaining rather than fighting back. And yeah, this is personal to me. Makes me angry. New York-born Sheila Nazari is a plastic surgeon, Jewish activist, and Instagram influencer. Is it more important to a lot of Jews to be liberal and accepted by their liberal friends than to be Jewish and to stand up to what's going on?
I think that they're having a crisis right now. I had a patient in my office 2 days ago that's been a lifelong liberal, and she told me, Dr. Nazarian, I looked at my friend the other day and I was like, oh my God, are we Trump supporters now? So I think there is an awakening happening. I think that it is very difficult for a lot of liberals. And the way that I want to pose it to you and your audience a little bit is that, you know, Persian Jews like me, South American Jews, Russian Jews, we escaped socialism and communism, which we associate with the language of the left. So we don't understand how anyone can vote for the left. Whereas the Ashkenazi Jews suffered and have a trauma from the Holocaust, and they associate that language with the right. So lifelong, that's how it's been. But I feel like there's been such a huge shift to the left that now the people that, you know, were the liberals of 20, 30, 40 years ago are kind of like moving from the center to the right. They kind of moved to the center, now they're to the right.
That is such a fascinating analysis in terms of why, right? And liberalism doesn't mean what it used to mean. That is for sure. That said, though, there seems to be an unwillingness to say nothing else matters but stopping what's going on our streets. This isn't about Palestinians. This is about eliminating Israel and killing Jews. And what's interesting is even President Biden's staff now are defending these people. Here's Adrienne Elrod on MSNBC. Take a listen.
President Biden certainly, unlike President Trump, supports the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. So obviously these protesters are exercising their right, and that is their right to do.
Okay, and yes, that is their right to do. The First Amendment exists in America. We all know that if this were people in white hoods chanting about people getting off buses or whatever, not only would the White House be talking about how terrible it is, Kamala Harris would be down riding buses or riding the New York subway, whatever it is. That's not what this segment's about. What I think is interesting is that Jewish donors who overwhelmingly donate to Democratic causes and Democratic candidates haven't said either you fire her or we're going to stop donating. There's absolutely there's no parents I've heard who say we're not paying tuition to Columbia and Harvard. All of the things, all the pressure points that
I've heard that a lot. I stopped donating to Columbia 10 years ago.
No, I didn't say donating. I didn't say donating. I said they're going to stop paying tuition. I mean, can you imagine if every Jewish student at Columbia said, I'm not paying tuition, and then you force the school to kick Jewish kids out? I'm talking about actually like, hey, we're going to pull money out of financial institutions that do business with Qatar. There's an awful lot of things that would be uncomfortable for Jewish Americans to do, but they seem unwilling, and I'm wondering why you think that is.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I think you've got a point, and also there's a little bit of a problematic question you're asking. It's almost like saying to the victim who's getting raped, why didn't you push back harder? We have to first fight back. Leland, we have to create an environment where anti-Semitism is as unacceptable as what you said, the people in white hoods chanting for the lynching of blacks on U.S. campuses. Number one, yes, and I agree with you that I think a lot of Jews have lost their attachment to Judaism. Their religion now is liberalism. And
I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds, but you create that environment by making it so unacceptable to be that way. If you wear a white hood, if you say the wrong word, if you call people things, you're fired, you're shamed. Jews have the power to do that, and they're not.
No, I think a lot of us actually are, but you have to understand we're 2% of the U.S. population. We need allies. Yep. We need you guys to, like you are, Leland, thank you. We need all of you to stand up alongside us. And I believe 70% of Americans are on our side. We just have to make this an important enough issue for them to want to speak up with us.
Well, I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm one of you guys as well.
Great.
At least half, but the wrong half. Hey, it's great having you. A conversation to be continued. Thank you very much. Chris Cuomo picks it up from New York.